France has one, Japan has one, Mexico has one, Vietnam has one, and the United States? Weirdly, it doesn't. No official national dish of USA. Not burger, not hot dog, not apple pie, nothing. Which sounds almost impossible, right? Because if there's one country that seems to have shoved its food into every airport, mall, highway exit, and late-night craving on Earth, it's America. So here's the question: how can the most globally recognizable food power on the planet have no single dish to represent itself? Stay with me, because by the end of this, you'll see why that's not a weakness in United States culture at all. It's actually the clue that explains American food culture better than any burger ever could. And the twist at the end is kinda perfect. Most countries have that one dish people instantly latch onto. You say Japan, people think sushi. Italy, pizza or pasta. Mexico, tacos. Peru, ceviche. Vietnam, pho. Even if a country has hundreds of regional foods, there's usually one meal that acts like the face on the passport, the edible shortcut, the dish that says, yep, this is us. So naturally, you'd expect the same thing from the United States. Big economy, massive cultural influence, Hollywood, music, fashion, tech, and let's be honest, enough food brands to fill an entire highway with glowing signs. So what's the American answer? Hamburger, apple pie, fried chicken, barbecue, Thanksgiving dinner? Here's the problem. Every time you pick one, millions of Americans would probably squint at you like you just called ranch dressing a beverage. That's us? Really? And that's the first clue. The US is just too big, too regional, and too mixed for one dish to carry the whole thing. Think about how different American food is depending on where you are. In New England, you get clam chowder and lobster rolls. In the South, it's barbecue, fried chicken, biscuits, soul food. In Louisiana, Cajun and Creole food bring together French, Spanish, African, and Native influences into something completely its own. Out in the Southwest, Tex-Mex is basically a whole identity. California leans hard into fresh produce, fusion, health trends, and yes, avocado toast, the food that somehow became a personality test. The Midwest? Corn, casseroles, meat-heavy comfort food that feels like it was designed to survive winter and also your uncle's opinions at Thanksgiving. So which one gets to represent everybody? That's the issue. Any choice includes one America and excludes another. A lobster roll doesn't feel like Texas. Texas brisket doesn't feel like Maine. Chicago deep dish doesn't feel like New Mexico. And if you try to solve that by choosing something more generic, like the burger, then people start arguing about where it came from, who did it best, and whether fast food counts, which, to be fair, is the most American argument imaginable. Now here's where it gets interesting. The reason the US struggles to choose one national dish isn't just geography, it's history. Because a huge amount of what people think of as American food didn't begin in America at all. Take the hamburger. The name points back to Hamburg, Germany. Hot dogs? Also heavily tied to German immigrant traditions. Donuts have roots in Dutch settler cooking. Pizza came from Italy, then got reshaped in the US. Into New York slices, Chicago deep dish, and every frozen supermarket version college students have ever eaten while making terrible life choices. Apple pie? That one is the funniest. There's this famous phrase, as American as apple pie. Except, apple pie didn't start in America. So one of the strongest symbols in American cuisine history is basically an adopted tradition that got naturalized and handed a tiny flag. And honestly, that's very on brand. Because American food has often worked like this. Something arrives from somewhere else. People adapt it, regionalize it, industrialize it, supersize it, argue about it, and eventually call it American. Not because the original disappears, but because the new version becomes part of life in the US. That pattern matters more than any single recipe. And before we go further, there's a layer of this story that gets buried way too often. Long before immigrant dishes started being folded into the American table, there were already food systems here built by native peoples. Corn, beans, and squash, sometimes called the Three Sisters, formed one of the foundational agricultural systems of North America. These weren't random crops. They worked together. They fed communities. They shaped the land and the menu. And corn especially, it's everywhere in the US. Cornbread, popcorn, grits, tortillas in the Southwest, corn on the cob at cookouts, corn syrup in, well, let's just say a suspicious amount of the grocery store. Even Thanksgiving, maybe the most mythologized meal in the country, traces part of its story back to Indigenous knowledge and Indigenous foodways. Yet, in popular memory, that foundation often gets blurred out, like America keeps layering new meals over older ones and then forgetting what the first table looked like. That's not a side note, that's part of the answer too. Because the earliest layer of American food wasn't one clean national cuisine, it was already a meeting point and eventually a collision point. But wait, there's something even more surprising. Even without an official national dish of USA, there are a few unofficial finalists that keep showing up like candidates in an election nobody can finish. The hamburger is probably the strongest global symbol. If you asked someone on another continent to picture American food, burger is near the top of the list. The hot dog has baseball, street carts, fairs, and summer cookouts behind it. Apple pie carries patriotic symbolism, even if its family tree says otherwise. Barbecue has deep roots in serious emotional loyalty, but say barbecue in North Carolina, Texas, Kansas City, and Memphis, and you may accidentally start a small civil war. Then there's Thanksgiving dinner, and this one is sneaky, because for most of the year, Americans eat very differently. But on Thanksgiving, an enormous percentage of the country sits down to roughly the same meal: turkey, stuffing, potatoes, cranberry sauce, pie. That's probably the closest the nation gets to genuine food consensus. Not perfect consensus, obviously. Some families do ham, some add tamales, macaroni and cheese, lumpia, biryani, or dishes that reflect their own heritage. Which weirdly makes it even more American, because even the most shared American meal becomes a platform for multiple identities at the same table. That's a pattern, remember that. Actually, quick pause. If you like videos that take a simple question and reveal the whole hidden story underneath, this is exactly the kind of rabbit hole we go down here, so, stick around for more if that's your thing. Now, a lot of people describe America using food metaphors, which tells you something by itself. You've probably heard melting pot. That means different cultures blend together into something new. Then there's salad bowl. That means different cultures stay distinct, but still exist together in one whole. And honestly, American food is both. Sometimes ingredients blend so completely that the original roots get blurry. Other times, the roots stay obvious, proud, and visible. Think about Chinese American food. A lot of dishes that Americans think of as normal takeout classics were shaped in the US for American tastes, in immigrant communities adapting to local demand. Same with Tex-Mex, same with California roll sushi, same with all kinds of new American cooking that basically says, what if we mix everything and stop apologizing for it? That's not fake cuisine, that is the cuisine. This is one of the most fascinating parts of American cuisine history. Some foods become American not because they are pure, but because they are mixed in a specifically American way. And once you notice that, another paradox appears. The United States has no single official dish, but it may have the most globally influential food system on Earth. That's not an exaggeration. American chains spread everywhere. American fast food became a global language. Soda, burgers, fried chicken, coffee chains, drive-thrus, combo meals, refill culture, giant portions, snacks engineered to be weirdly impossible to stop eating. America exported not just dishes, but an entire way of eating. That is a huge part of United States culture in the modern world. And it gets even stranger when you realize that some of the most internationally recognized American foods aren't old peasant dishes or royal court recipes the way you might find in other countries. They're often products of mobility, commerce, migration, branding, convenience, reinvention. In other words, America didn't just export food, it exported food culture. The speed of it, the scale of it, the image of it, the idea that food could be casual, portable, standardized, remixable, and sold everywhere. So now we're getting closer to the real answer. But before we land it, one more important piece. People sometimes ask, why doesn't America just pick one dish anyway? And the deeper answer is that this isn't really a food debate. It's an identity debate. Because choosing one real American dish means deciding which version of America gets centered, whose story counts, whose history gets highlighted, whose food gets treated as heritage, and whose gets treated as foreign, even if it's been here for generations. A lot of immigrant foods in the US were mocked, distrusted, or treated as outsider food before becoming mainstream favorites. Pizza was once ethnic, Chinese food was once foreign, tacos were once not really American. Now they're woven into everyday life so deeply that millions of Americans eat them without even thinking of them as unusual. So when people argue about American food, they're often really arguing about who belongs inside the national story. And that's why the answer couldn't come early in this video, because if you just say America has no national dish because it's diverse, that's true, but it's way too shallow. Here's the stronger version. The United States doesn't lack a national dish because it failed to create one. It lacks a single national dish because the country itself was never built around one origin, one people, one region, or one uninterrupted tradition. It was built through movement, collision, borrowing, adaptation, and constant reinvention. That's why every candidate falls short, not because they aren't American enough, but because too many things are. And that leads to the twist. The most powerful thing about American food is not one dish. It's the ability of American food culture to absorb dishes from somewhere else, transform them under American conditions, and send them back out into the world in new forms. That's why a country with no official national dish of USA still shapes how the planet eats. That's the real flex, if I can say flex without sounding like I'm trying too hard. Other countries may have one meal that represents the nation. America, for better and sometimes for worse, represents a process where German becomes hamburger, Italian becomes New York slice and Chicago deep dish, Mexican becomes Tex-Mex, Japanese becomes California roll, regional barbecue becomes 15 arguments and a documentary-level obsession, an immigrant dish becomes American, then mainstream, then global. So what is the national dish of the United States really? In my opinion, it's not a dish at all. It's the table. A table where native foundations, immigrant traditions, regional identities, mass production, family memory, adaptation, and reinvention all keep showing up together. Messy, inconsistent, sometimes commercialized beyond recognition, sometimes genuinely brilliant, but unmistakably American. That's why not having one national dish isn't a hole in the story. It is the story. Countries with very old, more continuous cultural identities often can point to one defining dish because their national story was built around deeper continuity. America was built differently, out of difference, out of movement, out of people bringing their own food, then changing it, then being changed by everybody else's food in return. So the absence of one dish isn't proof that America has weak identity. It's proof that American identity is still being cooked. And maybe that's why the country that doesn't need one dish to represent itself became the country the whole world keeps eating from. When everybody brings their own meal to the table, you can't choose just one and call it the nation. But you can look at the whole spread and say, yeah, that chaos is the point. So if we zoom out, here's the big picture. America has no single national dish because it's too regional, too immigrant-shaped, and too unfinished to fit into one plate. And weirdly, that's exactly what gives American food culture its power. Now I'm curious, if you had to choose one dish to represent the United States, what would you pick and why? Drop it in the comments. If you enjoyed this, give it a like, subscribe, and hit the bell. And I'll see you in the next one.